Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let's Be Creative, specifically creative careers, where we interview folks who are working in the arts or arts-related fields from all over. And today we are introducing and interviewing a music producer, Dean Palya. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit. Let's start with the basics. What does a music producer do? And maybe specifically for you, what do you do in your music producer work?
That's a good question. There's a lot of different paths you can take in music, obviously, and even in music production, there's a lot of different things you can do. Typically, today when we talk about music production, we're talking about the person who works with the software, and maybe they play all the parts in and they do the mixing and everything, or maybe they have other musicians play for them. But typically, it's the person that's kind of making the tracks. And so in my case, I've found different areas to kind of use that skill of being able to kind of sit down at a computer and make a bunch of music. I've found music libraries is a really valuable way to kind of use that skill. So a little bit about music libraries. They're basically, whenever somebody needs music for a YouTube video or a commercial or a TV show, they have to get a license in order to be able to use that music, because they have to pay the people that made the music, right? So in that case, a lot of times where people will go is they'll go to a music library, it's called, and they can just go on there, search for songs, listen. They say, "Oh, this one works for my video, so I'll use that." And in that case, then they pop it in and they license the song with the music library company, and through a bunch of hoops, eventually somebody gets paid. So that's kind of one area that is a really good way for music producers to kind of work and have consistent work. So that's one thing, but there's other areas as well. There's sample making, for example. That's another thing that I've done a lot of. And that's basically where you create little samples, they're called in music, little short clips of sounds that can be used to kind of create more music. And so there's various sample companies, sample websites that will provide these samples and give you a platform to use them. So there's a lot of, as you can see, there's a lot of different areas that you can work as a music producer. It's the traditional idea of music producer is guy that sits in a studio, guy or girl that sits in a studio and just kind of, tells the band to play and what to say. And, but these days it's really evolved.
No, that's very interesting. All right. So tell me a little bit about your journey specifically. How did you end up here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think for me, it's always been kind of an equal part of music producer and entrepreneur. That's kind of always been the two driving forces for me. So when I started out, when I was just a young musician, I was just starting out and taking classical piano lessons and playing in the grade school band and all of that. I started teaching myself to play guitar, and eventually I kind of came into a situation where it was like, "Hey, do you teach guitar?" And I was like, "I have not, but I could, yes." So I will teach guitar. So I started teaching guitar and actually grew that business throughout middle school and high school. I grew that business to be about 20, 25 students per week, teaching piano and guitar. And so I grew that into a nice little business there. And so I've kind of taken that approach beyond that age and started doing businesses that were related to the art field that I wanted to be in. And I think that's really important is it's kind of, anytime you're in the arts, there's always this kind of perception of, oh, it's a little bit shaky, like maybe it's not as steady. And it's in some ways kind of true. You know, there's not always somebody who will, you know, pay you a regular salary to do your work. Um, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of opportunity and a lot of chances to make money. There's plenty of chances for everybody that wants to be a part of it to do it if they have the skills. And so it really comes down to seeking out those opportunities in the same way that an entrepreneur would seek out opportunities. So for me, you know, I started in college. I started reading about and figuring out how do I get music into a TV show? How do I get music into a YouTube video? And that's kind of when I stumbled upon music libraries and how those work. And so, you know, I think it's really important to kind of be seeking out those opportunities, thinking about where is somebody who's willing to pay for what I can do, and kind of follow the money into being able to use your skills to actually work in there. But yeah, I think, you know, that's, my passion has always been for recording sound. You know, I started with a little 4-track tape recorder when I was 11 or 12 years old, and just became obsessed with it, became obsessed with the next step, which was a little, you know, old laptop that barely ran, but it took like 20 minutes to turn on. But you know, it was the progression of just kind of being obsessed with recording these sounds and making songs and trying to get it to sound like my favorite song at the time, and you know, using that skill that I developed over a long period of time, over 10, 15 years, using that to be able to actually make money and say, okay, well, I know here's where all the money is. There's, you know, music libraries, samples, you know, clients. I've produced for a lot of clients that just want their song recorded. So I know there's these opportunities and I have this skill. So just kind of plugging them in and going from there.
Yeah, on a kind of a related note, I'd love to hear you talk just for a minute about what makes music producing exciting or interesting for you, in maybe especially in contrast to what people might think of as like traditional musician work.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's really great about you know, being a producer that's specialized in or works in the music library scene is that you get to create in all different genres, right? You get to you don't have to just focus on one thing. You know, a lot of times, you know, musicians will kind of get pigeonholed, maybe in their work, and they'll kind of become the country guitarist or the classical violinist or whatever they might be known for. But with being a producer that does music library stuff, you can really, genre is not a binding category at that point. You can work in any genre, and a lot of times you do. So it'll be like, hey, we need a track that is, I don't know, we need a jazz track. So it's like, okay, I can do a jazz track. So you get to work on jazz, and then it's like, hey, we need a you know, pop song that sounds kind of like the Chainsmokers. It's like, okay, I can do that too. You know, so you get to really run the gamut of genre, and that's kind of, you know, one of the things that I personally have always been kind of drawn to, is just working in all different genres, working in all different types of music, because the way I, you know, listen to music, the way most people listen to music, is they don't really only listen to one genre. You know, even if they listen to a few different genres, they're usually kind of listening to multiple different things. Maybe they're listening to jazz and classical, and then they also listen to pop, or maybe they listen to hip hop and EDM and lo-fi, right? So it's fun to be able to do that and be a producer that can create in all those different things.
Yeah, for sure. What were some of the skills that you really needed to work on for yourself to get to a professional level? You started about starting off on some of this very young, what were some of the things that you really had to, what skills did you really have to hone?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I started out, it was a very different time because, as I mentioned, I was starting off on like a tape recorder, a little cassette tape recorder, and then I was going into this computer it was very kind of like puzzle pieces. It was hard to even get information at that time. The internet was there was no YouTube at that time, so it was like, getting information was, I used to read books. I would read these massive books on recording and techniques and all that stuff to just try to get information. So the skill that I had to work on was really the skill of sculpting sound and being able to listen to something and then understand exactly why it sounds like that and what it's doing, and then be able to do that thing and create that from scratch. And so that's a skill that today is still very valuable, but it's not as apparent because a lot of information is readily available. So you can go on YouTube, you can watch tutorials, you can go on sample websites and download samples that are already finished and sound great. So what I would say is that skill of understanding why something sounds the way it does and being able to recreate it is probably the most valuable skill. Even though you don't need that skill today in order to create a song, you can create any song just by downloading some good samples. But it's if you want to be able to work in many genres and be able to kind of be very versatile, it's the one skill that's just critical. And what that looks like, for anybody who maybe does record stuff and is a little bit more into the scene, what that skill looks like is basically being able to sit down with a recording and one-to-one recreate it. So start with the kick drum, and you kind of listen to the kick drum and you kind of figure out, what does that sound like? Where have I heard that sound before? Maybe it's in a synthesizer I have, or maybe it's I can find that same sound somewhere on a sample website like Splice. And then you just recreate that kick drum, put it exactly where it needs to be on the grid, and then move on. Okay, what does the snare sound like? How do I get that sound? And sometimes you have to get creative. Sometimes it's a challenge, and but that's when you learn stuff, and that's when you figure out, okay, now I know how to get that sound. So when a client comes or when a music library comes and they say, hey, we want this sound, you're like, I got it. I know how to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So this is going out when, at least in our area of the world, in my area of the world in California, schools are in flux about whether they're going to be opening in person in the fall. It's very likely going to look very different. There might not be a lot of opportunities for students to get out and really learn stuff out in the world. You mentioned some resources already. What would you suggest that a student who thinks this is really interesting, what can they do from their home today to work on some of these skills if this is a path they maybe want to pursue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two different things I think that would be really valuable. One kind of on the skill set side, the art side, and one kind of on the entrepreneurial side. So on the art side, I would say, the single most valuable thing you can do to kind of learn every aspect of creating a track is to do track recreations. Kind of what I was mentioning earlier. This is the thing that, no amount of anything else will teach you as much as just sitting down with a song, your favorite song, whatever it is. Maybe it's a pop song, rock song, jazz song, and just sitting down with it and trying to create it exactly one-to-one, like you can't even tell to the point where you can't even tell the difference. And just being able to do that, and you start to learn every aspect of production that way. You start to learn about how each sound sounds, because you have to really listen to each sound to figure it out. And then you get to start to figure out how different sounds work together. And you figure out like, okay, well, when this part of the song happens, they have these sounds playing, because you really critically figured it out. And then you start to think about the mix. You learn about the mixing because you start to try to match it, and you're like, oh, I see, the kick drum is really loud here. I didn't think it would be that loud. Okay, interesting. So now I see that the kick drum's loud. It's really just a really valuable tool, and it's something I really started doing in college. And I remember I started, I did 3 or 4 of them in a few different genres, and that was probably, I learned as much doing that as I did going to college for recording music. So it's a really valuable thing. And I would say the other side of things, if you're working on trying to figure out how to make money in doing this, and kind of setting yourself up for a career, the most valuable thing you can do is sit down and make a list of every place you've heard music, every place you hear music. It could be, on a TV commercial, on when I went to, the store, or I went to Six Flags, and they have music there. I went to, a restaurant, and there was music there, right? Every single place you hear music. On your phone, you're scrolling through Facebook, it's like, oh, there's an ad for this thing. I heard music there. Start to create and compile this list of everywhere you hear music, and then figure out where they got that music from. Because anybody who's using music legally is paying, somebody's getting paid for it. And if you can figure out an area where, hey, this person is, wow, I see there's an opportunity to make music for this particular scene, this particular thing, I can do that. I can make that kind of music. I can figure out who made that kind of music. So I would say that's the most valuable thing you can do right now, is just figure out where the music is coming from. And you'll start to learn which companies are involved, which music libraries, which individuals, and you'll start to kind of learn your way around the industry that way. So those 2 things: 1, recreating tracks one-to-one, and 2, figuring out where music's coming from and how they got it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Thank you so much, Dean, for being willing to share all your expertise with us today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks, that's it. And don't forget to tune in again next time at 1 p.m. for more Let's Be Creative Arts content. We'll see you then.